When Shaq's teenage daughter, Imani, walks into school one morning, she has no idea her worst nightmare is about to happen. A racist teacher named Ms. Whitman targets her for no reason and shaves her head in front of the whole class, just for fun. Hurt and ashamed, Imani runs home crying. But when Shaq finds out, everything changes. He storms into the school, full of anger, and gives a powerful lesson that no one will ever forget. As emotions rise, justice is done in the most shocking way. Before continuing this story, let us know in comment section, where are you watching from today? Let's begin our story. The soft morning sun slid through the old blinds, casting golden stripes across the small, clean bedroom. A quiet alarm buzzed on the nightstand. Imani Parker stirred beneath her blanket, her brown hand reaching out with slow, sleepy fingers to hit the snooze button. The walls of her room were full of life. Posters of black girl poets, a worn Lakers jersey signed by her father, and a corkboard filled with photos of friends and family. A sketch of a lioness, drawn by her friend Louise, hung above her desk. Below it, books were stacked high, some school-related, others not. Angela Davis, Maya Angelou, Michelle Obama. She sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes. Her long black hair spilled around her shoulders like silk. She was 17, with warm brown skin, deep hazel eyes, and a quiet strength in her posture. Imani had that calm kind of beauty that didn't need loud colors to stand out. She was smart, focused, and kind-hearted, but carried an old soul, like she had lived many lives already. In the kitchen, a deep voice sang along off-key to Al Green's "Let's Stay Together." Pots clanked, bacon sizzled. Imani grinned and got up. "Daddy," she called, pulling on her hoodie as she came out of her room. Shaquille O'Neal, legend, gentle giant, and neighborhood protector, stood by the stove, flipping pancakes, with a serious look, like he was handling game day strategy. He wore a dark t-shirt stretched over massive shoulders, gray sweatpants, and house slippers. His bald head glowed in the morning light, and his goatee was perfectly trimmed. The man was a walking mountain. He turned when he heard her voice, his face breaking into a wide smile. His deep-set eyes sparkled with pride. "There she is," Shaq said, holding up a plate like a trophy. "Best daughter in the world, reporting for breakfast duty." Imani chuckled, sitting at the table. "That bacon better be crispy this time." Shaq widened his eyes in mock offense. "Excuse me? I am the master of bacon." He placed the plate in front of her. Eggs, pancakes, bacon, and fresh-cut fruit. "Boom! A championship breakfast. You're welcome." Imani smiled. "Thank you, Daddy." He sat down across from her with his own plate, watching her eat like he was checking if she had enough. He always did that, watched her quietly, as if protecting her in silence. There was a sadness deep behind his eyes sometimes, but it only flickered now and then. They ate in warm silence, then turned on the old radio in the kitchen. Stevie Wonder's "Isn't She Lovely" started playing. Shaq turned the volume up and pointed at Imani. "This song's about you, you know." Imani rolled her eyes, laughing. "That song's about a baby." Shaq leaned back in his chair, arms behind his head. "Exactly. And I remember holding you like that yesterday." "You're being dramatic." "I am dramatic," he said with a wink. "But I'm also right." She looked at him with soft eyes. "You always say that." Shaq leaned forward, suddenly serious. "Because it's true. Be strong. Be kind. Be brave. Every day, no matter what." Imani nodded. She had heard those words 1,000 times, but they never lost their meaning. Outside, the neighborhood of Baldwin Hills was just waking up. Kids played on the sidewalk. Neighbors watered their lawns. Dogs barked from porches. It was a mix of older homes, apartments, and a deep-rooted community that had seen better days. but still stood strong. Shaq's black pickup truck sat like a tank in the driveway. He opened the passenger door for Imani. Always a gentleman. She climbed in and looked out at the street. "You ever think about moving somewhere quieter?" Shaq started the engine, the truck rumbling like a beast. "I did once, but this is home. Our people are here." He drove through the neighborhood, waving at every kid they passed. "Mr. Shaq," a group of little boys called out, running toward the truck. He stopped and leaned out the window with a smile. "Y'all staying out of trouble?" one kid yelled. "Only a little bit," Shaq laughed. "You better not let me hear otherwise." Imani smiled as the kids waved and ran off. "See what I mean?" Shaq said. "This ain't just our block. It's our village." She nodded. "I get it." The school came into view, Baldwin Hills High. Big gray buildings, metal gates, and cracked concrete. A mix of pride and frustration. Students filed in, some with headphones, some in groups, others quiet and alone. Shaq parked at the curb. Before Imani opened the door, he placed a giant hand gently on her shoulder. "You good?" She smiled softly. "Yeah." He looked at her for a long second, then said, "You got this, baby girl. You always do." "Love you, Daddy." He kissed her forehead. "Love you more." She stepped out, backpack slung over one shoulder, and walked into the crowd. Shaq watched her go until she disappeared into the building. Then, finally, he pulled away. Inside the school, the hallways buzzed with morning chatter and the slamming of lockers. Imani spotted her best friends right away, Keisha Monroe and Luis Hernandez. Keisha had a big personality, bold, fearless, and funny. She wore her bright red braids in 2 buns today, matched with hoop earrings and a black Girl Magic t-shirt. She was always dressed like she had somewhere fabulous to be. "Hey, Sunshine," Keisha called, pulling Imani into a side hug. "You look like you slept." "I did, for once." Luis stood beside her, quiet as usual, sketch pad in hand. He was soft-spoken, with smooth brown skin, black glasses, and a kind face. He wore layers, long sleeves, flannel shirt tied around his waist. He didn't talk much, but when he did, it meant something. "Morning," he said with a smile, looking up from his sketchbook. "You ready for today?" Imani nodded. "Let's hope it's boring," Keisha scoffed. "In this place? We should be so lucky," they laughed, walking together toward their first class. The warmth between them was real. They weren't just friends. They were family. But as they reached the history wing, the mood shifted. A silence fell over the hallway. Ms. Dolores Whitman stood by her classroom door, arms crossed, face stern. She wore a buttoned-up beige blouse, a long skirt, and pearl earrings. Her silver blonde hair was pulled into a tight bun, and her lips were thin and pale. Her eyes were sharp and cold. She watched Imani as she walked by, closely, like a hawk watching prey. Imani kept her eyes forward, trying not to show the tension in her shoulders. Keisha whispered, "She stay looking at you like you owe her money." Imani said nothing, just kept walking. But her heart beat a little faster. Luis looked back at Ms. Whitman with a frown. "She doesn't like when people speak up, especially not you." "I don't even talk that much in her class." Keisha leaned in. "You're smart, Black, and not scared of her." That's 3 strikes in her book. They reached the door. Ms. Whitman stepped aside without a word, letting them enter. The room was cold. Gray walls, old maps, a big American flag above the whiteboard. Desks in neat rows. Imani sat in the middle row, Keisha beside her, Luis behind them. Ms. Whitman moved to the front of the class, her heels clicking on the floor. "Seats," she said sharply, even though everyone was already seated. "Books, open, chapter 6. And just like that, the day began. But something was already in the air. Something quiet, something waiting. The clock in the classroom ticked loudly, Tick, 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 like it was counting down something no one could see yet. The air was too still, the energy too tense. Ms. Whitman stood at the front of the class like a statue, her back straight, arms crossed in front of her. She wasn't tall, but she made herself feel tall with the way she looked down her nose at the students. Her voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Today's lesson," she said, walking toward the board, "is on the Civil Rights Movement, page 118. Let's begin with the Montgomery bus boycott." Her voice was sharp, clipped, like she didn't want to be teaching this part of history, like it tasted bad in her mouth. Imani sat up straight in her chair. This was the kind of subject that meant something to her. She had read books outside of class, watched documentaries, talked with her father about it. Civil rights wasn't just history. It was now. Ms. Whitman turned to the class. "Who can tell me what triggered the Montgomery bus boycott?" Imani raised her hand. Ms. Whitman's eyes narrowed for a second. Then she forced a small smile. "Yes, Miss Parker?" Imani's voice was steady. "Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat to a white passenger. It sparked a movement that lasted over a year and led to a Supreme Court ruling that segregation on public buses was unconstitutional." A few students nodded, but Ms. Whitman didn't nod. Her smile tightened into a frown. "Interesting interpretation," she said, walking slowly across the room. "Though some would argue it was more about the economic impact than a single act of protest. The movement didn't succeed because of feelings. It succeeded because it hurt the bus company's wallet." Keisha leaned over and whispered, "Girl, what?" Imani kept her voice calm. "But feelings are part of the fight. Rosa Parks made a personal choice based on dignity. The boycott was about human rights, not just money." Ms. Whitman stopped walking. Her face hardened. "Let's not get too political, Miss Parker." Imani blinked, confused. "But it was political. That's the point." Ms. Whitman raised her hand, stopping her. "We are here to discuss facts, not opinions. Let's stay on task." The room went silent. Imani felt her stomach tighten. She looked around the classroom. A few students glanced her way, uncomfortable. Others looked down at their books. Luis shifted in his seat, his jaw clenched. Keisha muttered under her breath, "Every time." The rest of the class dragged on, each minute stretching longer than it should have. Ms. Whitman moved on, asking other students questions, but her gaze kept drifting back to Imani, cold and dismissive. Later that day, in the teacher's lounge, Ms. Whitman poured herself a cup of coffee, her lips tight with thought. Across the room, Mr. Trent, a young science teacher, leaned against the counter. He looked up at her. "Rough class?" he asked casually. Ms. Whitman sipped her coffee. "Same as always." He raised an eyebrow. "What's that mean?" She looked over her glasses at him. "That Parker girl, Imani. She's got a chip on her shoulder, always trying to correct me. Acts like she knows everything." Mr. Trent frowned slightly. "She's bright. One of the best students in the school." Ms. Whitman waved her hand. "Bright doesn't mean respectful, and lately I've noticed a pattern. These students, they don't know their place anymore." Mr. Trent's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. He knew better than to push. Ms. Whitman had tenure and power. She smiled to herself and sipped her coffee. Over the next few days, things got worse. In history class, Imani's grades started dropping. Not by much, just enough to hurt. She'd write full essays, answer all questions, cite her sources. But still, grade C+, comments. Needs better focus. When she asked for feedback, Ms. Whitman simply said, "Try again." With more objectivity, in group projects, Imani was quietly replaced. The project she was supposed to lead was given to another student, one of Ms. Whitman's favorites. Imani walked into class one morning to find her name missing from the group list taped to the whiteboard. She blinked, confused. Keisha leaned over. "You're not in our group?" "No," Imani whispered. "I was." She raised her hand. "Ms. Whitman, I think there's been a mistake. I was assigned to the Civil Rights Documentary Group last week." Ms. Whitman didn't look up from her clipboard. That group needed stronger leadership. "We made adjustments." Imani blinked, stunned. "I've been working on the outline for days." "Then I hope you'll use that energy on your new assignment." Ms. Whitman turned away. Page 132. The class sat stiff. No one said a word. Luis scribbled something in his sketchbook. Imani glanced down. A small drawing of a lion in a cage. Her eyes softened. At lunch, the three of them sat outside under the big oak tree behind the gym. Imani picked at her food. Keisha said, "You gotta go to someone, girl. This ain't right." "I already did," Imani said quietly. "I talked to the assistant principal yesterday. He said Ms. Whitman has tenure, a clean record. Nothing they can do unless it's serious misconduct." Luis looked up from his sandwich. "So, what, she just gets to do this?" Imani shook her head. "It's not about one thing. It's everything. She's trying to break me down without ever saying the wrong word." Keisha leaned in. "She mad 'cause you're smarter than her." Imani gave a tired smile. "I don't want to fight. I just want to learn," Luis said. "You shouldn't have to choose." That night, Imani sat at the kitchen table, trying to focus on homework. The history textbook lay open, but the words blurred. She rubbed her eyes. Shaq entered quietly, still in his gray hoodie from the gym, holding a Gatorade. He saw her slouched over her notebook. "Rough day?" Imani paused, then nodded. "Yeah." Shaq pulled out a chair and sat beside her. "Talk to me." She looked at him, eyes heavy. "It's my history teacher. She's different with me. Like she's always waiting for me to mess up. And now she's pulling me off projects, lowering grades, making me feel small." Shaq's face didn't move, but his eyes darkened. "Ms. Whitman?" he asked quietly. Imani nodded. Shaq leaned back, his hands folded on the table. "You know, I used to think my size made people treat me different. But it wasn't just size, it was skin, voice, presence. And when they can't control you, they try to contain you." He looked at her with love and pain in his eyes. "You've got that same presence, baby. And it scares people who live small." Imani's lip trembled. "She's taking everything from me." "No," Shaq said softly but firmly. "She's trying, but she'll never take anything from you. Because I'm here. You hear me?" Imani nodded. "I'm watching," Shaq said, "and I'm ready. If she pushes too far—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Imani closed her notebook and leaned into him. He held her tight, his big arms wrapped around her like armor. Outside, the night settled over Baldwin Hills. But inside that little house, the fire had already started burning. The school bell rang, but the sound didn't bring the usual relief. Imani sat at her desk in Ms. Whitman's history class, arms folded tightly across her chest. She felt like a thread being pulled too tight. Any second, she might snap. Luis sat 2 rows back, his eyes flicking between Imani and the teacher. His sketchbook lay closed in front of him. Keisha leaned sideways in her seat, whispering, "You good?" Imani nodded faintly. "Yeah, just tired." Keisha looked unconvinced but didn't press. Ms. Whitman entered the room with her usual sharp heels tapping like a metronome. Her hair was tight in its bun, not a strand out of place. She placed a manila folder on the desk and scanned the class with a calm but calculating look. "Today, we'll be doing something different," she announced. Imani felt the muscles in her shoulders tighten. Different meant danger. "We're going to have an open discussion. I want to hear your voices, your thoughts on leadership, obedience, and respect. She walked slowly to the whiteboard, writing those 3 words: leadership, obedience, respect. Her marker squeaked against the board. "I'd like someone to start, Miss Parker." Imani looked up, startled. "Me?" "Yes. You always have so much to say." There was a tightness in her voice, a mocking edge. Imani swallowed. Her voice came out steady, but cautious. "I think leadership is about listening, about standing up for others, not just telling people what to do." Ms. Whitman turned around slowly. "Interesting. And obedience? What does that mean to you?" Imani hesitated. "Obedience can be dangerous. People followed rules during slavery, during the Holocaust. Blind obedience isn't always moral." The room fell quiet. Students froze, uncertain. Ms. Whitman's smile didn't reach her eyes. "So," she said sharply, "you're suggesting that school rules are comparable to genocide?" "No," Imani said quickly. "I'm saying people should think, not just follow orders without question." Ms. Whitman nodded slowly. "So, then, if I ask you to be quiet, that's tyranny?" Imani's breath caught. She felt the heat rise in her chest. "I didn't say that." Ms. Whitman stepped forward. Her voice dropped, cold and sharp. "Miss Parker, your attitude is the problem, not your intelligence. You come in here with your tone, your pride, your hair in the air like a flag." Keisha shot up in her seat. "Whoa, what?" "Sit down, Miss Monroe," Ms. Whitman barked. Louise stood too. "You're crossing a line." Ms. Whitman pointed toward Imani. "She needs to learn humility." Imani stood now, her voice trembling with disbelief. "You're not teaching me humility. You're trying to humiliate me." Ms. Whitman walked to her desk and opened a drawer. What she pulled out made the whole class stiffen. A pair of electric hair clippers. The buzzing sound filled the room like thunder. Imani's eyes widened in horror. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice cracking. Ms. Whitman looked calm, too calm. "You think your pride lives in your hair," she said. "Let's take that away. Let's see if there's anything left." 2 students, Jason and Mallory, her favorite quiet helpers, stood up slowly, confused but obedient. One closed the door. "No," Imani whispered. "This isn't happening." Keisha jumped forward, grabbing Imani's arm. "We're not doing this." But Ms. Whitman was already moving. "Sit down," she snapped. "All of you." The clippers buzzed louder in her hand. "I said sit!" Imani froze as Mallory grabbed her by the wrist. She tried to twist away, but Jason stepped behind her. Louis stood up fast and took out his phone. "Don't touch her." "Put that away," Ms. Whitman shrieked. "No," Louis said quietly, shaking. "People need to see this." Imani's breath came in short gasps. She was shaking, sweat beading on her forehead. Ms. Whitman pressed the clippers to Imani's head. The first lock of hair fell. Someone screamed. The room exploded into chaos. Keisha shoved Mallory back, yelling, "Leave her alone!" Luis backed into the corner, recording with trembling hands. Imani was crying now, silent tears running down her cheeks, but she didn't scream. She just stood there, frozen, as the sound of clippers filled the air and her curls dropped onto the floor like fallen feathers. Ms. Whitman didn't stop until Imani's head was bald. "Now," she said softly, standing back, breathing hard. "Maybe now you'll learn your place." Imani stood there, her face soaked with tears, her body trembling. The room was dead silent. Even the air seemed to stop. No one moved. Then, slowly, Imani stepped back. Her hands touched her head, bare, raw, violated. She turned and ran, out of the room, down the hall, into the bathroom. Keisha was right behind her, shouting her name, holding her hoodie in her hand. Inside the bathroom, Imani collapsed on the floor. Keisha wrapped her arms around her, covered her with the hoodie and held her as she sobbed. Outside, the bell rang again, but no one moved. Luis pressed send. The video shot across phones like wildfire. One went straight to Imani's older brother Malik, another straight to Shaquille O'Neal. And somewhere in that moment, something ancient and fierce awakened inside him. Something unstoppable. The sun was high over Los Angeles. The city moved in its usual rhythm, horns honking, people talking on sidewalks, helicopters in the sky. But inside the Baldwin Hills Community Center, everything stopped. Shaquille O'Neal stood in the middle of a gym, handing out signed basketballs to a group of excited kids. His massive hands dwarfed the ball. His smile was warm, gentle, genuine. "You keep working hard, all right? Stay out of trouble, listen to your mamas." The kids nodded. A few laughed. His assistant, Tamika, was standing near the bleachers, phone in hand. Her face was pale. She walked slowly toward him, holding the phone like it was something dangerous. "Shaq," she said quietly. He looked at her and instantly saw something was wrong. "What is it?" Tamika hesitated. "It's Imani." Shaq's smile faded. "What happened?" "She was hurt at school. You need to see this." She handed him the phone. Shaq took it, raised it to his eyes, and hit play. The video began. At first, his face didn't move. Then his jaw tightened. His hands gripped the phone until the plastic case cracked. The sound of the clippers buzzed through the tiny speaker. He watched as his baby girl stood frozen, her curls falling to the floor. His breath got heavier. His eyes didn't blink. When it ended, he handed the phone back to Tamika without a word. The gym was dead silent. Even the kids had stopped talking. Shaq's voice was low. Too low. "I'm coming, baby," he said. Then he turned and walked out of the gym. His feet hit the floor with a heavy rhythm. Every step was a promise. The black pickup truck pulled into the school parking lot like a storm rolling in from the hills. It was Shaq's truck. Custom lifted, chrome wheels, matte black paint. The engine growled like a beast. When he stepped out, it felt like the world shifted. Shaquille O'Neal was not just tall. He was huge. His shoulders were broad, his hands like slabs of stone, his face hard with grief and rage. Kids stared from the sidewalk. Some froze. Some backed away. "Yo, that's Shaq." "No way. What's he doing here?" He walked up the path without saying a word. Each step was slow, deliberate. Inside the school, the secretary stood up, stammering, "Mr. O'Neal." "Where's the principal?" Shaq asked, his voice like thunder in a bottle. She pointed down the hallway, speechless. He walked through the halls like a giant among ants. Students moved out of the way instinctively. The principal, Mr. Bennett, a thin, nervous man with glasses, stepped out of his office just as Shaq approached. "Mr. O'Neal, good afternoon. Shaq stared at him, his deep voice cutting through the air. "Where's the woman who laid hands on my daughter?" Mr. Bennett's face turned pale. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. "I asked you a question," Shaq said. She's in her classroom, but Mr. O'Neal, please." Shaq turned and walked past him. He didn't knock. He didn't wait. He opened the classroom door and stepped inside. Ms. Whitman stood at the front of the classroom, writing on the board like nothing had happened. When she turned and saw him, she froze. Her face twisted into something confused and afraid. You can't be here," she said, backing up a step. Shaq didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He just looked at her with a cold, focused stare. "You touched my daughter's crown." His voice was low and full of thunder. "You crossed a line." The room was silent. Students stared wide-eyed. A few held up their phones. Ms. Whitman tried to find control in her voice. "I was maintaining discipline. You shaved my daughter's head. You humiliated her. You broke her spirit in front of a room full of kids. You think that's discipline?" She swallowed hard, lips trembling. "Mr. O'Neal." Shaq stepped forward, towering over her. My daughter has more strength in her tears than you'll ever have in your whole life. Ms. Whitman looked down, finally silent. Shaq turned to the students. Y'all okay? A few nodded. Some looked ready to cry. He spotted Luis and Keisha in the back. Keisha's eyes were red. Luis held his phone tightly. Shaq walked to the door, held it open. Come on, baby girl, he said. Imani stood in the hallway, her head wrapped in a hoodie, Malik by her side. She stepped in slowly. Ms. Whitman looked at her and flinched. Imani looked her straight in the eye, bald, proud, hurt, but still standing. Shaq wrapped his huge arm around her. We're leaving, he said. And just before he walked out, he turned back one last time. I'm not done. Then they left. By the time they got outside, a crowd had formed. Parents, students, local news vans, cameras rolling. Shaq and Imani walked slowly to the truck. Malik opened the door. Reporters shouted questions. What happened inside? Is it true she was assaulted by a teacher? Mr. O'Neill, what are you going to do next? Shaq stopped. He looked at the crowd. Then he lifted Imani's hand and held it high. This is my daughter. She is brave. She is beautiful. And she is going to be okay. Then he helped her into the truck. And as they pulled away, the world watched. And nothing would ever be the same. The video spread faster than wildfire. By sunset, it was everywhere. News stations played it on repeat. The image of Imani, her tear-streaked face, her shaved head, the cold hand of the clippers, burned into people's minds. Social media exploded. Justice for Imani. Protect black girls. Shaq stands. Strong. People were angry. But more than that, they felt it. Parents saw their daughters. Fathers saw their babies. Students saw themselves. The next morning, the school looked different. Not physically, but the energy. It had changed. TV vans lined the block. Reporters stood outside the gates with cameras and microphones. A crowd of parents and students held signs. End teacher bias. Protect our kids. We believe Imani. Inside, Principal Bennett looked like he hadn't slept. His tie was loose. His phone rang nonstop. The school board was demanding answers. Lawyers had shown up. And Ms. Whitman, she didn't show up at all. She was placed on administrative leave within 24 hours. By the end of the week, she was officially under investigation for assault, abuse of authority, and multiple past complaints that had somehow never been documented properly. Suddenly, her long, clean record didn't look so clean anymore. That Friday evening, a local news channel aired a special segment titled, "The Crown They Tried to Break, Imani's Story." Imani sat in a quiet studio, a soft light on her face. Her head was still bald, but she wore no hoodie now. Just a simple black dress and quiet strength. Shaq sat beside her, calm, watchful. The interviewer, a kind woman named Joy Ellis, spoke gently. Imani, first, I want to thank you for being here. Imani nodded. Thank you for letting me speak. Joy leaned forward. What happened to you was painful to watch. But you're here now, and I think a lot of people want to know. How are you feeling? Imani took a deep breath. I'm still hurting, she said honestly. But I'm not ashamed. Her voice was calm, steady, real. She tried to take away something I loved about myself, something that made me feel proud, beautiful, powerful. She touched her head softly. But hair grows back. What she can't take is who I am. Shaq looked at her with eyes full of pride. He blinked slowly. His massive hand rested on hers. I used to think being quiet would keep me safe, Imani continued. But silence lets people like her win. I'm done being quiet. There was silence in the studio. Then Joy asked, what would you say to girls who saw your video and are afraid to speak up? Imani turned to the camera. "I'd say you are not alone. Even if no one in the room stands up for you, there's a world full of people who will. Don't let fear make you small. Stand tall, even if they try to cut you down." Malik, Imani's older brother, was never one for cameras, but online, he was a beast. Within days, he launched a page called Stand with Imani. It offered legal resources, school advocacy tips, and a place for other students to share their stories. And they came. Hundreds of them. Stories from kids in other schools, other cities. Girls who'd been told their hair was distracting. Boys punished for speaking up. Brown-skinned students called aggressive for just asking questions. The truth spilled out, and the world listened. Shaq personally funded free legal consults for families who'd been ignored by their schools. He told CNN in an interview, "This isn't just about my daughter. It's about a system that breaks our kids and tells them to be grateful for it." Ms. Whitman didn't go down quietly. She tried to defend herself, called it a disciplinary action, said she felt threatened by Imani's presence. But too many students stepped forward, and this time they were heard. One girl named Tasha said, "She told me my braids looked like a distraction. I was 12. Another boy said, "She docked my grade when I wrote about Malcolm X. Said it was too radical." A parent broke down crying at the school board meeting. "I told the school last year she was targeting my son. No one listened." But now you listen, because a famous dad showed up. That stung, because it was true. But instead of denial this time, the board listened. Change began. They brought in an independent review team. Ms. Whitman's full history was uncovered. 8 hidden complaints, 3 parental letters buried by administrators. She was fired permanently. Her teaching license was revoked, and the district launched a full anti-bias training program across all campuses. A few weeks later, the same school, a different vibe. Imani stood in the mirror at home, looking at herself. Her scalp had a soft shadow now, her hair starting to return. But she wasn't waiting for it to grow back to feel beautiful again. She already was. Shaq came into the room holding 2 lunch bags. "You want the spicy chips or the Cool Ranch?" he asked. Imani smiled. "Spicy." He handed it to her, then looked at her in the mirror. "You ready?" She took a deep breath. "Yeah." They drove in silence to the school. As they pulled into the parking lot, students were already waiting. Some had signs, some clapped, some just stood and smiled. When Imani stepped out of the truck, heads turned, not in pity, in respect. She walked through the gate, bald and proud, head held high. Luis met her with a quiet fist bump. Keisha ran up with a huge grin, holding out a pin that read, "My crown is my power." "Come get your queen badge," she said, hugging her. The halls didn't feel cold anymore. They felt alive, safe, changed. Shaq didn't drive away right away. He just sat there, watching her walk inside. His massive hands gripped the steering wheel loosely. Malik sat in the passenger seat, watching him. "She's gonna change the world," Malik said quietly. Shaq nodded slowly. A single tear rolled down his cheek. "She already is." He put the truck in gear and drove off into the sunlight. Guys, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this story. Let us know about your thoughts in the comment section. Also, subscribe the channel for daily stories notification.